So since I have no idea, normally the whole introduction process is supposed to be more formal than this, but I have no idea where Jim is. So I was asked to. Jim asked me to give the keynote this morning, and it was interesting because he said I need a placeholder for Blackhat, so just make up a really. So he said just make up a title. So don't ask me why, but I had jazzercise on the brain, and no, I don't do jazzercise. So I thought, fine, Jim, cloudercise. There's my title, and we'll get to it later. So about 2 weeks later, my phone rings, and it's my PR department. It says, hey, yeah, about this talk. I'm like, oh, I know, the title, the funny subtitle has the word like, for a firmed, more toned ass, like, as a service. I'm like, yeah, the title really isn't the problem. I said, well, what's the problem? They said, well, the abstract, the actual description of the talk. I said, well, what do you mean? And I'd never made one. Well, then I went to the website, and apparently Jim, in a fit of creative inspiration, created one that has words like, sometimes an ass is so ugly you have to keep it private. Well, it's in your books. So I, at that point, had no idea what it is I was and am supposed to do. So I decided that I would stay true to form and make stuff up. So Cloudersize is the revolutionary 12-step program for a firmer, more toned as a service. And basically, what I thought I'd do today is kind of give an overview of, from a security perspective especially, of where we are, kind of not really a state of the nation, but a state of the union, but really just a high-level overview of where we've come from the perspective of how security organizations, risk managers, and compliance folks are dealing with cloud. So in line with this goofy topic and title that was very difficult to write a presentation for, what I found interesting was, of late we've seen an awful lot of folks rebranding their solutions with a lot of these kind of literally with a great analog to the get, fit, quick schemes and infomercials you see on TV, where now there are an awful lot of quick fixes being offered for problems that have been around for a long time that in many cases map to cloud and in some cases don't, have nothing to do or aren't particularly unique to cloud. Some will tell you that everything from the perspective that we have done goes out the window and you have to completely retool, especially from a technology perspective. And in many cases what we find is the impact is more organizational or operational versus technical. A lot of the things, however, from a compensating controls perspective, as we've kind of found out as a community, don't map very well as people are rushing to kind of take what was physical solutions and map them to the virtual world. That said, everyone seems to be coming to market with a set of virtual appliances that don't solve or introduce interesting, unique sets of problems and challenges associated with how you might deploy those products along the lines of resiliency, scale, management, etc. And of course, this stuff is supposed to be, given the way cloud functions, is supposed to be an enabler that gets you to be able to do things quicker, faster, more agile like cloud. But in fact, what we find is, in many cases, security by design doesn't scale. And just because cloud doesn't mean the security practices do. And in fact, we run into some interesting analogs. So I started combing the intertubes and magazines for examples of sporting equipment that I found particularly interesting from as it relates to this talk. Has anybody seen this thing in real life? Right. Everyone's seen it in the magazine backseats of the right. Okay, first T-shirt winner. Tell me how much this device costs if you've actually seen it. $14,000. Well, the Amazon guy gets a shirt. $14,000. This thing. It looks like I think you can do dips, like a cycle thing, pull-ups, push-ups, but it's $14,000. But it promises you that you can get the equivalent of an hour's workout in 4 minutes. 4 minutes, which is awesome. Then we have this, Tony Little's Gazelle. Now, I think that this thing is, what's funny is he's this really big buff dude that talks like this, and if you look at the design of this device, you could probably figure out why. We have the ever-popular ThighMaster, or I should say this is actually the ThighMaster Gold. You can tell because it has Climaster Gold on it. I have no idea. And then there is this, the most homoerotic new workout thing I have ever seen. There is, if you've not seen this, this is the, I have no words. No word, literally. So I thought, yeah, that pretty much sums up where we are from a security perspective in cloud today. The shaker. I'm tempted to order one. Yes. I can probably get it on Amazon, correct? Mr. Riley? All right, fabulous. So what does it really take to get a firmer, more toned ass? Well, I think ultimately is acceptance that security does make your ass look fatter. And what I mean by that is we talk about a lot of, one of the biggest reasons you want to move to cloud is for cost savings. But when we look at the types of controls and how we actually have to deploy compensating controls, in many cases what happens is we come to the realization that, for example, as we move from network-based controls back to guest-based controls and infrastructure as a service specifically, or as we go up the stack where we have less and less operational control, it's kind of like a squeezing the balloon problem. We end up going from maybe a few gateways and a few firewalls and things that, as we've choked down, that we've gotten pretty good at managing, and we have the teams that understand how they work, and the compliance and audit guys understand the functions, and then we move into the guest, where now we're going back to the realm of having to install agents in many cases on those hosts, since we can't plumb and connect to the network, which is a huge scale problem. If what you're trying to address is this notion that I can auto-scale assets up and down, that means I have to auto-scale my security controls. So ultimately, if I can now auto-scale to 100 or a couple of hundred or even 1,000 images on your favorite infrastructure as a service provider or platform as a service provider, that means I now have the corresponding number of endpoints I have to manage that I didn't have to manage before. So in many ways, we're dealing with this notion that it's kind of a transference of cost, and it has operational impact also. The understanding that the game has changed, that we're going to have to, and the guidance does, I think, a real decent job of trying to point out the differences between what we do today that works and what doesn't, and how we have to think differently. Ultimately knowledge of kind of what exercises, if you will, using this theme work and what don't. I mean, I think it's just important to really get a grasp on when we think about moving to cloud, software platform or infrastructure as a service, how we have to adapt what we do. If cloud is about gracefully giving up direct operational control over big chunks of that infrastructure, we have to figure out how we have to adjust, right? And really, it still comes down to a ton of hard work, mostly focused initially on risk management that we traditionally have not done that good a job of. So when we talk about cloud, in honor of Vegas, I like anagrams. So I figured what I like to think of in terms of talking about security or compliance and wrapping those things, sweeping everything under those rugs, I like to think in terms of trust. And trust to me really comes down to compliance, resiliency, assurance, privacy, and security. So, craps, yes, I did actually manage to get a Vegas analogy in there. And I think what's interesting is when we look at the landscape of both operational and technical sets of things we have to manage here, what is interesting is the first one. I wrote a blog post a while ago that got picked up by Novell. They did an interpretive poetic reading video. I don't know if you've seen this. It was really, really cool. Like background drums and people snapping their fingers. It was pretty cool. But the title of the blog post was Cloud Security Doesn't Matter. And my whole point here was that in many cases, we say that security is the biggest stumbling block to cloud. I maintain it's actually compliance. I maintain that, for example, I could take a set of applications, whether I have the source code or not, and move them into a public cloud environment, SP or I, quite frankly, and deploy them as securely, if not more securely, than I can in my enterprise on a one-for-one basis. If I'm willing to change my operational model, if in some cases rewrite the application, deploy new controls, retrain people, and make different investments. But the whole point here is we call that security, but ultimately I could do all of that and still not be compliant. Right? So if you come under the auspices of a particular compliance framework that simply has no way of addressing disruptive innovation like virtualization or cloud, and you can name most of them today, that is the biggest stumbling block I think we still have, which is actually getting the compliance framework folks to be as agile as the service delivery mechanisms that we're hoping to use. And that's a huge issue for us. Right? No matter, we can put out the best guidance in the world, but if an auditor says fail, because essentially you don't meet the spirit or the word of the compliance, we're stuck. So from the perspective of these 12 steps, I kind of thought a lot about the biggest elements and issues that people are having when I talk to them both in my day job and at conferences, and I thought I'd summarize them in ways that do a reasonable job of painting a picture of where we are. So the first one, and by the way, all of these pictures are of fat, half-naked men. So if you're easily offended, you should probably leave now. So really, I think the notion here is that we have to get off the couch. From the perspective of security, you can't swing a dead cat without people in the security team whining about the fact that they're not engaged in this process. Now, that could be for good or for worse, but the reality is if the security teams themselves are not involved in understanding the differences and don't get involved in telling the business or compliance or auditors that ultimately these are the things and new risks or different risks or different threat models that we have to look at, that's nobody's fault but our own. And I hear it day in and day out. The network guys or somebody fired up a set of instances on Amazon. I didn't know about it. I have no control. Woe is me. And then ultimately reaching back when something is about to go live or they discover it, and then using compliance as the hammer. Now the compliance and audit guys are the best friends because now they can use compliance to stop something as opposed to enabling it. And I think that's kind of problematic from us. We're in a little bit of a vicious cycle here. Instead of getting engaged, getting off the couch, and involving ourselves, we're waiting for people to invite us to the table, which I think is a dangerous precedent. So setting goals is kind of important. It reaches back to the first point, which is our goal from a security perspective to get in the way or try to make things better? In many cases, it seems to be in certain organizations that it's the former, that people are still stuck on the no spot. I think ultimately cloud computing in all of its forms, delivery and service models, gives us unique advantages to actually fix some things and do some things differently that we have not done for quite a while. Right? Ultimately, as in many cases, this model of computing changes, I think it's great. I think it's a great forcing function. I think in some cases we're a little disadvantaged from some of the tools we could deploy, but it really makes us focus on the things that matter. I think people don't see it enough as an advantage that they can actually use to move their own agendas forward from a security perspective. And a lot of this comes to goal setting. I think at this point we're still very much into triage and arbitrage of like, no, you can't do that. Well, guess what? They're doing it anyway. I think the other thing is really understanding your options when it comes to what you can do. And there's actually there's quite a bit of both technology as well as operational things that quite frankly I think most people are already familiar with, but because it has the word cloud in it, people freak out. And what I mean is we've been outsourcing and dealing with third parties for decades. Right? And when you look at the basest elements of when we talk about contractual obligations, service levels, who manages what, cloud is just a new delivery deployment model that we have to kind of look at from that scope and appropriately assess risk. So in many cases here, we may not be able to stop things from happening, nor should that necessarily be our goal. But I think ultimately being able to understand the differences, especially in the SPI model, software platform infrastructure as a service, that the lower down the stack the cloud provider stops, the more responsible you still are. So in fact, I think the whole point here is when you look at infrastructure as a service, all of the things that you used to do internally to your enterprise, save for the actual moving parts of the infrastructure, so the virtual machines, the operating system, the application, and the data, still requires you and actually needs you more than ever. So when you think about things like web application security, where behind we used to rely on firewalls and WAFs and perimeter, border ingress egress based controls, where that doesn't really apply anymore. The notion of what we're focusing on and where really needs to change. And I think